Good afternoon and welcome to Promo. Sit and learn about voting. And, it's about happy hour time, so we hope that you have a sip of something that will get you through the afternoon. But we just wanted to make some time and space this afternoon to really answer any voter questions that people have. So we are really excited today to have Philip Deitch from the Gateway Business Guild and Denise Lieberman, who has a couple different titles that I'm going to read so I don't get them wrong. The Missouri's Election Protection Coordinator, the General Counsel to the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, and General Counsel to Promo and Promo Fund. So we're really excited that folks can join us this afternoon with their voter rights questions. As folks probably know, there are only 4 days left before the Tuesday election. We know that we are seeing from around the country and probably around the state, although I'm sure Denise will give us a little bit more information, record turnout. And that has included absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, early voting in states that have it. And then, of course, we're expecting a lot of folks to come out on Tuesday. We've been really excited here at Promo to be engaging with our community, the LGBTQ community, to make sure that people know what they need to go vote. What are the processes? Where do they need to go? What time? And then we've also been doing phone banks and text banks to encourage people to get out and vote. So I might talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but I just wanted to thank everyone for being with us today. Promo, for anyone that doesn't know that's watching, is our state's LGBTQ advocacy organization. We do a lot of work in Jefferson City, but then we also work around the state to make sure that our issues to the LGBTQ community are being lifted up in all the places where decisions are made. So whether that is government, within organizations, making sure that we have our robust training program to make sure that we are building a Missouri that is more inclusive to the needs of our LGBTQ community. So I don't want to go on too long, so I will go ahead and pass the floor over to Philip Deitch with the Gateway Business Guild. Philip.
Hi, everybody. Hope you do have those drinks with you. I can't wait till we finish and I can get one of mine. I'm the president of the Gateway Business Guild. Our purpose is to serve as the regional chamber of commerce for the LGBT community. We do that with a broad range of programs to help network our community as business owners, as LGBT employees in various companies, and as consumers in our region. And we're looking for many of you who might want to get involved or just participate in our educational programs to be in touch with us. We've been in operation in various forms for almost 30 years now. I would like to encourage you to like our Facebook page. Our website is currently down. We're reorganizing it, a brand new web page, and during November, we're going to have some pretty big announcements about the future of the Business Guild and how we're going to be in a new position, better position to serve our region. So please like our Facebook page, come back often so that you are among the first to see that news. Also want to mention the program today is a nonpartisan program, but it's important to know that on the national level, our national organization, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, has endorsed the ticket of Vice President Biden. And so just be aware of that. You can go to their page and see all the details on that endorsement. Now I get to introduce our presenter is Denise Lieberman, University City raised, St. Louis-based lawyer and community activist who specializes in civil liberties, civil rights, and constitutional law. She's recognized as a nationwide expert on voter identification law, having prepared testimony for the United States Senate Judiciary Committee when they had their hearings on voting laws. She was also the author of a seminal report on voter identification laws, which the New York Times wrote, accurately characterized the trend as the largest rollback of voting rights in a century. That was about voter ID. She was counsel of record in litigation which challenged the photo ID laws in Missouri, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. As Stephen said, she'll be speaking today in her position as the general counsel for the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and Missouri's election protection coordinator. But Denise and I go back 25 years together, getting to work professionally in community service, and actually when we could get together, enjoying time in our personal lives and family lives. I'm thankful for her friendship and her wisdom, which you're going to get to benefit from today. One item I wanted to share with you about Denise's background is for the about 10 years that she was the legal director for the ACLU of Eastern Missouri, we had come up with a project to create an LGBT coalition, community coalition, which I chaired and she supported, and as the staff director, we operated for several years, met every single month, and grew to over 70 of our organizations. During that time, we supported the initial growth of our Black Pride celebration. We worked on efforts to open a community center. We were able to get a grant to support the expansion of our LGBTQ anti-violence project. And we only ended when we redirected all of our community efforts to try to defeat the anti-gay lesbian marriage amendment, which had occurred. So Denise is a really special person, and we're going to let her talk for a while, present, and then we're going to open up the program for your questions for her to be able to answer. So Denise.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Philip, and thank you to Promo for hosting today's Sip and Learn. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today, and I'm very, very proud to work alongside Philip and Stephen and Shira and Samadhi and the rest of the staff at Promo, both as a member of the Promo PAC board and as Promo General Counsel. And but in my day job, I am a voting rights lawyer and help run the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and the Missouri Election Protection Effort. And I do want to just give a brief mention, though, to Philip, because he's right. Our advocacy and friendship goes back more than a quarter century now. And I'm so grateful to call you a dear friend and a colleague. And it's just another reminder that the relationships that you build in activism really are long-standing. And so I'm so grateful for the relationships of all of the tremendous activists throughout the St. Louis metro area, throughout Missouri, who continue to fight day in and day out to make Missouri a more equitable place. And we're so fortunate in Missouri to have an organization like Promo that is out on the streets, in the legislature, in communities throughout the state, helping to promote equality for all Missourians. And that's really what I'm here today to talk about as well as a voting rights lawyer, is how to ensure that everybody has equal access to the ballot, because your vote is your voice. And democracy doesn't work if all people don't have the ability to exercise their voice. So we're going to talk about a few things in today's Sip and Learn to help make sure that you know your rights when you go to the polls this election day, and who to call if you see any sort of problems. So first and foremost, I want to just give a shout out here to election protection. This is who to call if you have any problems or if you have any questions. Election protection is 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683. You can call that number. You can even text that number, or you can go online to 866ourvote.org and chat with a professional. Every call into 866-OUR-VOTE is answered by an attorney. And here in Missouri, if you are calling 866-OUR-VOTE from the state of Missouri, the person that answers the phone and is going to talk to you is a Missouri attorney. It's going to be someone local. You're going to get help immediately. This hotline is live now. It's going to be live throughout the weekend during the remainder of Missouri's absentee voting period. And it will be live all day on election day as well. Here in Missouri, we are going to have over 1,400 volunteers monitoring polling places across the state of Missouri, documenting conditions and assisting voters to make sure that they are able to cast a ballot. Our belief is that no voter should leave a polling place without casting a ballot. So look on election day, you'll see some of our monitors out there with buttons like this, with t-shirts with election protection, with signs for election protection. They will have these cards. They will have, palm cards that go through all of the things you need to know about how to cast a ballot safely in Missouri. So please look for them and please call us. I should also note that we have these palm cards in other languages, and there are hotlines available in other languages as well to speak to voters for whom English is not their first language. Because again, our goal is to ensure that every voter is able to exercise their voice. And that's what's so critical about our elections. Voting is the way that we are able to speak in a public sense. And being able to cast a ballot is how society sort of acknowledges our presence and our dignity. Really, it does come down to basic human dignity. Because voting as a process, it quite literally says you count, right? I mean, we quite literally count you. And so when the right to vote is denied or abridged or made more difficult for some communities more than others, what's that say? It says you don't count. And our belief is that everybody counts, everybody has a right to have a voice, and we have an army of poll monitors and attorneys. We have over 200 attorneys signed up as well in Missouri. We have an army of poll monitors and attorneys who are dedicated to making sure that all people are able to exercise their voice on election day. So just a couple, I'm going to do kind of a top 5 things. I've got a short video to show, and then happy to open it up for some questions. So the first thing to think about, because today's Friday, we got 4 more days. First, think about whether you might be able to cast your ballot before election day. Some of you may have already applied to get a ballot through the mail. And that's great if you have. And hopefully, if you did, you have completed it and sent it back in. If not, here's a couple of things. First, it's now too late to get a ballot through the mail. That deadline has passed. So it's too late to get a ballot sent to you in the mail. However, you can still vote absentee before election day. If you have a reason that you can't make it to the polls on election day, like you'll be outside the jurisdiction, or maybe you are ill, or maybe you're serving as a caretaker, or if you are over the age of 65, any voter over the age of 65 can vote absentee, or if you have any underlying conditions that put you at risk for COVID-19, you can vote absentee. And here's how you do it. You have to go to your local election board headquarters or designated satellite locations. You can do that tomorrow, Saturday, October 31st, and you can do it all day on Monday, November 2nd, all the way until 5 p.m. That's a great way to get your ballot cast and not have to worry about the crowds at the polls on election day. To vote absentee, you need to show up. Don't need to do anything beforehand, but you do need to bring a form of ID. You will just complete the absentee application and cast your ballot right then and there. Now, what if you applied to get a ballot in the mail and you never got around to getting it turned back in? I know a lot of people are in this situation, and don't worry. While it is probably too late to put that ballot in the mail now, in order for it to arrive in time, because any ballot you got through the mail, it's going to have to be returned by election day. Any ballots that arrive at the election board after election day don't get counted. So it is too late at this point to ensure that you can get a ballot returned through the mail. So here's what you can do. If what you cast was an absentee ballot, you can turn it in person. At the same place that you could vote absentee, at the board headquarters or any satellite locations. Or you can spoil your ballot at the polls on election day, and it's kind of like a do-over. You're not going to be able to turn in a completed ballot at the polls on election day, but you can surrender it. An absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot. Surrender it at your polling place. It'll kind of cancel out your absentee mail ballot request, and you'll start over and just vote a regular ballot at the polls, just as if you had showed up at the polls in the first instance. The next thing I want to mention is ID. Here in Missouri, you do have to show ID to vote, but it doesn't have to be a photo ID. It can be, but it could also be that postcard you get from the election authority a few days before the election. That's a valid form of ID, as long as it has your name and your current address on it. It could also be a student ID from any college or university located in Missouri. It can even be a current utility bill or bank statement, as long as it has your name and current address. Voters have a right to assistance if they need any help reading or casting their ballot, and for any reason. And you can bring any person of your choice to assist you if you do need help reading or casting your ballot at the polls. Voters who would have any physical difficulties going inside a polling place have a right to curbside voting, and that will occur at your polling place. You would simply indicate that you need curbside voting. There will, in many locations, be somebody out there trying to track curbside requests, but anybody can go in and alert a poll worker that you need curbside voting, and a bipartisan team of election officials will come and bring a ballot to your car. And again, this is for people that would have some physical barriers to going inside the polling place. Voters have a right to vote free from intimidation. And this means that you have a right to enter and leave your polling place unimpeded. It means that you have a right to vote free from disruption. You have a right to vote free from interference. Voter intimidation is illegal under state and federal law. And so while you may see a lot of people at the polls on election day, there are limitations on what people can do at the polls. So inside the polls, the people who can be inside the polls is pretty limited. There can be poll workers, voters who are eligible to vote there, some international observers, and political party challengers. They're allowed to be inside the polls, but there's rules on what they can do, and they're not allowed to actually talk to voters, though they are allowed to challenge a voter's eligibility if they have a reason to believe that you're not eligible to vote, that you aren't who you say you are. But just because your vote is challenged does not mean that you will be unable to vote. It simply triggers an additional review of your eligibility. And if you're eligible, you're good to go. You can cast a regular ballot at the polls. Outside the polls, it's a little bit different story. There's really no limitations on who can be outside the polls. Of course, we have a right to free speech, but there are limitations on what people can do outside the polls. The first one is there's a buffer zone. Nobody can interfere with a voter within 25 feet of the polling entrance. Anybody. Voters have a right, it's designed to present sort of clear passage. Voters have a right to clear passage to get in and out of the polling place. Voters can, people outside the polls, poll watchers also cannot interfere with the voting process in any way, disrupt voters or the polling process, or engage in activity that is intimidating. And while that's a little bit subjective, it really does depend on the kind of activity that is taking place. So I will make a note briefly about firearms. Missouri is an open carry state, which does mean that people who are licensed are allowed to openly carry weapons, but there are rules that prohibit weapons from being inside of a polling place. So that's going to cover, that means that there's going to be no guns inside the polls or in that 25-foot buffer zone. Outside of that buffer zone, while people enjoy a right to free speech, while people in Missouri do have a right to open carry, neither of those things can be undertaken in a way that is intimidating to voters, that disrupts the voting process, or impedes the ability of voters to get in and out. And so if you see something, say something. If you have any questions at the polls, you want to make sure to call 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683. Like I said, we have attorneys here in Missouri who have been trained, who are standing by, who are going to take your call and be able to provide you with information immediately in real time. You never have to leave that polling place without getting some assistance. So I want to speak today as well to discrimination in voting, particularly with respect to our LGBT communities. Discrimination in voting is illegal. And that means that all people have equal access to voting. And so I want to speak briefly to issues related to transgender voters. I know that Promo has done some outreach with election authorities on this issue. And this is what's important. While voters have to show some form of identification at the polls, the fact that your appearance may appear different from a photo that may appear on your identification will not prevent you from being able to cast a ballot. If you are a validly registered voter, you are allowed to cast a ballot. Poll workers cannot discriminate against voters based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or non-binary status. If you experience any discrimination or just any intimidation based on your sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender presentation, please call us immediately at 866-OUR-VOTE. We do have a number of civil rights advocates and voter advocates who will be taking these calls that will be able to provide assistance. And the final thing I want to say before we sort of open this up, and I can speak to a number of these other issues as well that people have, is this is your day. Your vote belongs to you, and nobody can take it away from you. I want people to feel good about casting their ballot. You know, this has been a tough year for everybody, and we are entering this election in a state of heightened political tension in this country, in the midst of a global pandemic, in a state where COVID cases are rising, where people are fearful about their homes, their jobs, their health care, their rights. And for many people, we are voting under a new set of laws, a new set of rules. People may be casting ballots in a new way for the very first time. We know lots of polling places have been closed or consolidated because of the pandemic. And all of this leads to a space of heightened anxiety. We know that people are worried about making sure their voice is heard and worried that their vote will count. And I want to assure you that the law protects your right to have a say and your right to have a voice, and everybody should feel proud to go out and make their voice heard. Your vote not only is society's acknowledgement of your dignity, it's how we exercise self-determination. It's how we make societally decisions about what we want for ourselves, for our families, for our children. And more than that, collectively, our vote is how we build power and organize for change to help make the world and our community a more just and more equitable place. And so I want to show a very, very short video. It's only 1 minute long, that was produced for our election protection effort by our friends at Fuse Advertising, which is a local Black-owned advertising firm in St. Louis, Missouri, that really highlights the diversity of our electorate and the pride we should all take in being able to exercise our voice on election day. And so I'm hoping that video could be shown at this time, and then perhaps we can open it up for some discussion. Uh-oh, there's no sound. You might need to establish the sound. Are you able to get sound working? If not, we could come back to it at the end. All right, well, maybe if we're able to get the sound working, we can play it at the end. But I just want to, I hope that folks feel confident in their ability to exercise their right to vote. Know that there are resources here to help you. There are people here to help you. Poll monitors at your polling place on election day and before election day, attorneys at the 866 Vote hotline to help. And let's encourage everybody to go out and cast their ballot. So at this point, I'll turn it back to my good friend Philip Deitch and to Stephen and to Shira, and open it up for some discussion. What are you thinking of? How are you feeling before election day? Do you have any questions?
Denise, I had gotten I just want to review this to be sure, because we're all hearing so many folk on the news giving you advice, but they're talking across the whole country, and voting laws are different state to state. Now, so I had applied for an absentee ballot. It came in the mail. I never sent it back to get the actual ballot. So I just had the original application. But I brought it in with me. I went in to vote early last week, and I brought it in thinking that I had to surrender that original application. And they said, no, that was too early in the process, so that was not required. So could you review again at what paperwork do you need to bring in if you in any way started that early voting process?
Sure. If you never got a ballot, then you don't have to worry. If you never applied for, it sounds like you applied, but you never, or you never sent that application in. So that's no problem. If you actually got a ballot, that's the thing that you're going to have to turn in and surrender if you want to vote in person, either during early voting, absentee voting period, or at the polls on election day.
Okay, because even when I called in and asked the question, the operator at the election commission told me wrong information. So this gets confusing to people.
It is confusing. Yeah.
And so what do you need to bring with you as identification now in Missouri?
That's a great question, Philip. Here in Missouri, you do need to show a form of ID, but a photo ID is not required to vote. It can be a driver's license or a non-driver's license, or a federal ID like a passport, but it can also be that postcard that you get before election day from the election authority. That's a valid form of ID, as long as it's got your name and your current address on it. It can also be a student ID from any institution of higher learning in Missouri, or it can even be a current utility bill or bank statement. If it is a non-photo ID, it does need to have your current address, but if it's a driver's license, it doesn't.
So your gas bill, your electric bill, you could bring in. Do you then have to have something else that has your picture on it in addition?
No, a photo ID is not required to vote, and you can't be required to present more than one form of ID. Just one is fine.
Good.
Denise, I had a question for folks that may be watching the national news and hear a lot about early voting. Could you just maybe describe a little bit for folks that might be a little confused about what that process looks like in other states and whether Missouri does or does not have a process like that?
That's a really great question, Stephen. And, the truth is that Missouri is an outlier on this issue. The vast majority of states allow any voter to cast an absentee ballot before election day without having to present a reason. 34 states plus the District of Columbia permanently allow any voter to cast an absentee ballot without providing a reason. Missouri is one of the minority of states that still requires voters to have a reason that they can't go to the polls on election day. And it's one of the reasons that historically so few people in Missouri have cast ballots remotely or through the mail before election day. But this year, lawmakers did expand some options to cast ballots before election day by extending mail-in voting to any voter and by expanding some of the absentee voting options. But like I mentioned, it is now too late to get a ballot through the mail. And so voters would need to go to the election authority to vote absentee before election day. But I will say this, I think that this year's experiences with voting have really led a lot of Missourians to realize just how restrictive some of Missouri's laws are. And I hope that that will lead us to a broader conversation after Election Day when Missouri lawmakers return to Jefferson City in January to talk about making some of these reforms more permanent. All voters should be able to vote absentee. We should have early voting in Missouri. We should have a more streamlined voter registration process. I think many people are aware, have become aware, some for the first time, about just sort of how confusing and antiquated some of Missouri's election practices are.
I was glad to see Shara had popped up a note from Jeanette Mott Oxford on the screen telling us that she had voted absentee last week. Jeanette is a proud member of our community and former state representative. So we appreciate everything she has done and her making it clear that the process in the city is very easy. She was in and out in a half hour and she did a paper ballot. So it was a very easy process. She said it was very safe. Same when I went through, they keep people apart and it was all done very well. So that's good. I want to ask from the business community point of view, because this could be different around the country, but I know in Missouri, you don't have any expectation that your boss is going to give you time off to go vote at all, do we?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that, because a lot of people don't realize there actually is a provision in Missouri law that says your employer has to give you up to 3 hours of paid time off to go vote. But there's a big but there. Only if you wouldn't otherwise have 3 consecutive hours off of work while the polls are open. So the polls are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. So, for example, if you don't start work until 9, your boss technically would not be required to give you time off, right? Because you would have 3 consecutive hours. And you know, that's sort of unfortunate because it doesn't account for maybe the travel time or that you have to get your kids off to wherever they have to go. But what I will say is that more and more employers are recognizing the importance of promoting voting to their employees, and many employers have established policies this year allowing their employees to take time off or to offer them some flexibility on election day to ensure that they can cast a ballot. The other thing about that rule that I need to mention to you is that not only does the law say you're only entitled by law to time off if you don't have 3 consecutive hours while the polls are open, you also have to request it in advance. So it's almost 5 o'clock. Make sure, you know, if you fall into this category, and I will say that some members of our coalition are doing some terrific advocacy on this issue right now with shift workers in particular. Go to your boss, go to your supervisor, let them know that you need time off to cast a ballot on election day. There may be long lines, and because so many polling places are taking extra safety precautions to ensure that people have masks, to ensure social distancing, that could result in some additional delays at the polls on election day. So I can't sort of overstate the importance of making a plan and letting people know about it. Go and reach out to your supervisor now if you believe that you're going to need some time off on election day. Don't let this election go by without making your voice heard.
So the time off is with pay, or they're letting you
Yeah.
take leave without pay?
Yeah, you should be able to take time off with pay, but again, only if you wouldn't otherwise have 3 consecutive hours off, and you do need to make the request of your employer ahead of time. So reach out to your supervisor if that is your situation. Now, like I said, again, many companies in Missouri are really voluntarily enacting practices to promote voting with their employees. But sit down now, reach out to your supervisor, and talk about what your plan for election day is going to be to ensure that you can work out an arrangement with your supervisor.
So we've already seen around the country with some early voting where people have been online for 5 hours. So let's say I go to my supervisor before 5 o'clock today in the next 20 minutes, or I go Monday and the supervisor says, sure, and I'm online and it clearly is going to be more than 3 hours. What is my situation then?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you mean if you show up in person, because we don't vote online.
I've been online 3 hours and I'm still nowhere near the front door.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, that's a situation that you should call 866-OUR-VOTE, because if the lines are that long, that means that there's something going a little bit awry in the process. We can certainly expect that there might be lines on election day. Lots of people are very interested in going to vote. And again, because of the COVID pandemic, there are additional precautions in place that could make things go a little slower. But a 3-hour line is way, way, way too long. And it suggests that something isn't working quite right inside. So call us, first of all. Stay in communication with your supervisor, okay? They are required to give you up to 3 hours of time off under Missouri law, but like I said, many companies are voluntarily extending that for their employees. Many companies are recognizing the value in supporting and promoting civic involvement by their employees. So the key here is going to be communication with your supervisor. And depending on your specific situation, we have attorneys and we have attorneys on our election protection team who specialize in employment law. So give us a call if you are having a problem with this, and we'll make sure that you get in touch with one of those attorneys.
Okay. And of course, if you are aware, if you're turned down for the 3 hours for some reason, and you're aware that a non-LGBT employee was approved to go, they should get back in touch with that. If there's any sense that there's discrimination on you as an LGBTQ person, that raises issues that you can deal with your attorneys, yes?
That's right. That's right. All voters have a right to cast a ballot. The rules shouldn't apply differently based on your gender identity, your gender presentation, or your sexual orientation.
And I just wanted to jump in on that point and just say, my husband and I are traditionalists and we'll be voting in person on Tuesday. And if there is any promo staff that has not requested time off to go vote, obviously we encourage you to do that. Voting is critically important for us. Denise, I did want to ask one question that I feel like you alluded to a little bit. It was really what the process looks like for folks in COVID-19 times. So say someone maybe didn't vote in the municipal election or in the August primary, but is coming out and voting for the first time in November with these new precautions in place. What are some of the things that they can expect when they show up?
Sure.
It might look a little different.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, you may be prepared for a little bit of wait. You know, different jurisdictions have different rules about masks, whether they're mandatory or not, but all jurisdictions should make masks, sanitizer, and PPE available to all voters. The Secretary of State did get some federal funding that's designed just to ensure that polling places had adequate PPE and sanitizer. So all voters should have those options when they arrive at the polling place. If you don't have a mask, there should be a mask there for you. Now, what's going to be different from county to county is whether those masks are required. So some jurisdictions are requiring all voters and all poll workers to wear a mask, and are directing voters who appear without a mask or who refuse to take one of the masks they're offered to vote curbside from their car or at election board headquarters. So places like St. Louis City, St. Louis County, those masks are going to be mandatory for poll workers and voters. But in other places like St. Charles County, they are recommended but not mandatory. And they are not going to be turning anybody away or forcing anybody to wear a mask. And so it's going to differ from place to place. However, in all polling places, there should be sanitized devices, either pens or styluses. I know in St. Louis County, they ordered enough styluses. On one side, it's a pen. On the other side, it's the thing that you can write on the iPad. They ordered enough so that they would never need to reuse them. Each voter gets their own stylus who shows up. There should be there should be social distancing. Those check-in tables should be far enough apart. That's one reason why some of the polling places got closed or moved, because they were too small locations to ensure some social distancing. And surfaces should be wiped down regularly at the check-in table at each thing that you're touching. And we did see a lot of compliance with that. The Centers for Disease Control has put out recommendations specifically for polling places in the midst of COVID. And most election authorities are abiding by those very carefully.
Anything else between our different jurisdictions that anyone might need to be aware of? The city, the county, St. Charles County?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be some differences from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but all people do have a right to vote, and all people do have a right to assistance. We had to engage in some advocacy this week with jurisdictions that were not allowing curbside voting, for example, at all locations. And so we were able to successfully convince St. Louis County to ensure that curbside voting would be available at absentee voting locations, and Kansas City to reinstate curbside voting at all polling places. They had originally indicated it would only be available at their headquarters in Union Station.
Okay. So around the country, and then even one of our own listeners today has asked about the impact if you're a transgender individual. If you don't look like the image that's on your official government ID, how will that impact your ability to vote?
Yeah, I mean, that alone should not be a basis for rejecting you. So you may be asked to verify your identity if there is a stark difference, but the truth of the matter is that people that may be appearing different from that photo, that's not an unusual circumstance. Many of us don't look like our photos. If you are registered to vote and you have a form of ID that documents that, you should be allowed to vote without additional scrutiny. If you know that this is the case for your ID, you may wish to bring a non-photo form of ID, like that card you get from the election authority, because a photo ID is not required to vote. But again, nobody should be discriminated against because of their gender presentation, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity.
But the name on the document has to match the name on the voter registration.
The name
so
does.
If you're presenting using a different name, that won't work in that situation.
Right, the name does need to match the name under which you are registered to vote. But again, there are many forms of ID that are acceptable to vote in Missouri. So make sure that you're bringing an ID that does have your name on it.
All right.
The name under which you're registered to vote.
Registered to vote.
Right. And if you have any problems with this situation, please call us at 866-OUR-VOTE. As a last resort, you can also sign an affidavit attesting to your identity if that is challenged. So again, there are challengers inside the polling place who are allowed to challenge people based on identity. And it is my hope that those folks will not target people based on gender presentation or gender identity. But challengers inside the polls do have a right to challenge a person's eligibility based on identity. And in some of those cases, signing a statement attesting to your identity, presenting a form of ID should be sufficient to address that situation.
Okay, I'm so glad Promo has done work on that education process.
I am too.
On educating poll workers. So we thank you for that. That's been very helpful.
Yeah, really, really proud to be affiliated with Promo, and really, really glad to see the education that Promo did to really remind poll workers that scrutinizing somebody's gender presentation or gender identity is simply not acceptable at the polling place. All voters have a right to cast a ballot.
Okay. Stephen, did you have something?
I just did. I put it in the chat for folks too. In addition to the 866R vote, there is also a trans-specific and non-binary hotline, which I believe, at least as far as I know, is the first one. And I included that number as well, which is 239-946-2715. So that'll be available for folks as well, and led by trans folks. So just wanted to make sure that that was out there for folks as well.
Yeah.
That's a great resource.
Denise, one last thing we didn't address is what's going to happen when the polls close 7 p.m. on Tuesday. What can we expect here in Missouri?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think none of us really know what to expect, do we? But here's one thing I think we can bank on. We're not going to have instantaneous results. You know, I think that the days of going to these post-election parties and having the results come in within a couple hours are long gone, at least for this year. One reason is that so many people are casting ballots by mail, or casting absentee ballots. All those remote ballots have to be processed manually, and so it just takes a long time compared to ballots that are cast at the polling place or cast on an electronic voting machine. And so the message that we want to give people is don't expect to have final results on election night. Probably not even the next day either. It's going to take a little time to get these ballots cast, but that doesn't mean that the process isn't working. It means that election officials are hard at work counting all of the ballots, and that's what we want. We want all ballots to be counted, right? And so it will take a little bit of time, and so we may not have some really good numbers to know what the results are for a few days. And you can also keep in mind that as early numbers start to come in on election night, that really may or may not reflect what the final numbers are going to be. Because again, those ballots that were sent through the mail are just going to take a lot longer to get processed because they're done manually. What happens after you send a ballot in through the mail is, those of you who've done it know that you complete a form on the back of that on the back of the envelope that you return your ballot in, and bipartisan teams of election workers have to manually review the form on the back of that envelope to make sure that it's all complete, that you signed it, that everything's kosher, and that you're registered. And then they sort of divvy them up, and then they kind of put those ballots in a count pile, and then the ballots that are in the count pile have to get fed into the scanner, and then the tabulation comes. And so it just takes a little bit longer to get those ballots counted. And so the early results that you see may not reflect those ballots that were sent in by mail. They may just reflect votes that were cast on an electronic voting machine. And so it really may or may not reflect where the final numbers are going to end up. So just be patient. Know that your local election authorities are working overtime, quite literally, to count those ballots. And let's make sure that the process works so that everybody's vote gets counted.
So if an application comes in and there's a question, and we're going to have time for that video, we're going to try it again. But if an application comes in and there's a question about the signature, so they put it aside. In Missouri, do they have to get in touch with you to try to give you a chance to correct it or verify
Unfortunately, they don't. And actually, we filed a lawsuit challenging the fact that there was no mandatory notice. If you apply for an absentee ballot, they are required to tell you if your application was rejected. But once you actually send in the ballot, there's no requirement that they tell you if you missed a checkbox or if you have an error on that ballot envelope. They're not required to tell you that your ballot was rejected. But you can check. You can call your local election authority, and they can look it up for you and tell you And while they're extremely busy right now, I have found that they are very accommodating to respond to people's inquiries about the status of their ballots. So if you sent a ballot in, you may want to check and make sure that in fact it was received and is getting processed.
I'd like to suggest that not maybe, but if you sent your ballot in, we encourage you to go call your local election board, make sure it was received, and make sure there was no trouble with it. We don't want anyone not to be voting this time.
That's right. And in some jurisdictions, you can even do that yourself. Some jurisdictions include a barcode, like St. Louis County includes a barcode on those envelopes, and you can check that yourself online. Other jurisdictions, you might just have to make a phone call to your local office.
Should we now try the video again?
Oh, well. Oh. Shira, sometimes you have to click, I know in Zoom there's a little button before you share that you actually have to set up sound sharing.
But on Facebook Live?
Maybe not. Oh, well.
We love technology.
Sorry about that. I thought it would be a good way to close this out. Well, I'll just tell you, I suggested this video because it showcases just a real diverse range of voters, and it's very a positive message about making your voice heard, and it particularly showcases LGBT voters.
All right, so we're encouraging everyone who has sent back in their application, their ballot, to please call or check with their local board to make sure it was received. Now, the offices are closed as of 5 o'clock today in our region. Is that right, Denise? Can anyone still go today, or do they close at 5?
Yeah, I think they're closing at 5 in this region.
Saturday, they're open?
Yes, and the hours are going to differ depending on what election jurisdiction you are in. Some so all voting locations have in-person absentee voting tomorrow, Saturday, October 31st. Some are going to have hours in the morning. I know in St. Louis City they're going to be more in the afternoon and go until 5 o'clock. So just check the website of your local election authority. But there is in-person absentee voting tomorrow, Saturday, October 31st, as
Not
well
Sunday.
as no,
But
not on Sunday, not on Sunday. And also on Monday, November 2nd, until 5 p.m. at your local election board headquarters or satellite locations if you live in a jurisdiction that has satellite locations, like St. Louis City, St. Louis County, both have a number of satellite locations.
And of course, then Tuesday.
Yes, and Tuesday.
6 a.m. it starts and goes till 7 p.m.
6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And if you get there, I don't encourage you to wait till the last minute, but if that is what you have to do and you get there by 7 o'clock, you are allowed to vote no matter what. As long as you're in line by 7 o'clock, you're allowed to vote no matter how long it takes.
Never been an election more important than this one.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you, Denise. I know this has been a really informative broadcast for everyone. We were able to share the link in the chat. So those that are watching, you should be able to watch that after we close out here. I just wanted to leave with a couple of notes. One is that really encourage people to vote up and down the ballot. So, you know, if you are coming out to vote for president, maybe vote for governor, make sure that you're voting all the way down the ballot. You know, that is work that Promo is deeply engaged in, is making sure that we have more pro-equality champions in Jefferson City in the State House and State Senate. So encourage people to go to Promo PAC website and get a look at who some of those candidates are. So just wanted to share those resources. Also, in addition to the 866-R vote, we also have that number and some additional details at promoonline.org. We have a 2020 voter hub that people can check out. And then the last thing I would encourage, I know that there are a lot of people out there that might be saying, you know, I've waited for that opportunity to volunteer. I'm trying to figure out when I should do it. That time is now. There are just 4 days left. So really 3.5, I would say, to volunteer. So I just wanted to encourage people, if you're watching us on Promo's Facebook page, if you want to come back in 30 minutes, we are going to be participating with a number of other organizations around a spooktacular party with a purpose. So you can dress up in your costume, you can put your pet in a costume, you can enjoy some music. I believe they're also going to have some trivia and other things. So that's going to be a phone bank tonight. And then we are also going to have phone banks and text banks. So if you prefer to be on the phone, or if you prefer to text either through phone or computer, we have those opportunities for folks as well. And you can check those out either on our Facebook page or, again, promoonline.org. So again, just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and special thanks to Philip and Denise and Shira on our team, who's been doing tech as well. So major thanks to everyone for making this event happen.